Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. The morning of December 26th, 2014, started out like any other for employees at the Doubletree Hotel in Portland, Oregon. Guests were coming and going as usual, and things were busy, owing to both the holiday season and the hotel's location on Multnomah Street, just across from the Lloyd Center shopping mall. However, at around 11 a.m. that morning, things would take an abrupt and terrifying turn when staff members made a chilling discovery in the building's 8th floor stairwell. It was the body of a young woman who appeared to be in no way dressed for the cold winter weather. She had no shoes or socks on, nor identification of any kind, and at first glance, no visible injuries either. As detectives began to piece together the bizarre elements of the case, they would quickly make some unsettling discoveries. It was a twisted trail that would lead to 3 potential suspects, a mysterious hotel guest with 2 names, and a victim with 1 dark secret. Before we get to today's story, if you find our content interesting and informative and haven't already, we'd be honored if you'd take a second to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell. It helps you to keep up to date with our latest releases and helps us to keep up with that pesky ever-changing YouTube algorithm. With that out of the way, let's get to the video. According to those that knew her, Ashley Renee Benson was always a happy person. Though we don't know much about her early years, sources state that she lived with her mother in Montana. At the age of 13, Ashley decided to move to be with her father Michael and her stepmom Jody in the northeastern suburbs of Portland, Oregon. It was a big change for Ashley, but by all accounts, one that worked out well for her. She was incredibly close with her father and soon formed a strong bond with her stepmother as well, and reveled in the time that the family would spend together in the outdoors. In 2004, Ashley began attending Reynolds High School, where she quickly made a large circle of friends. She was known for her infectious laugh, her upbeat attitude, and just generally as a good and generous person. The kind who would give you the shirt off their back, one friend would later say. When Ashley was 17, though, her life would change forever when she gave birth to her son, Marlon. The boy's father, who was also named Marlon, was Ashley's high school boyfriend. The pair had been dating for 2 years, and despite their young age, decided that they would try to raise the baby together. According to Ashley's stepmother, Jody, at the beginning, things seemed to be going all right. Ashley and Marlon managed to finish high school in 2008 and were genuinely in love with one another. However, things took a turn for the worse once they officially moved out and tried to start their lives together. Once the young family were on their own, it wasn't long before reality started to set in. Ashley, who had always wanted to go to college, was forced to put her dreams aside in order to try and help keep them financially afloat. Even then, she and Marlon struggled to get by. The situation led to escalating tension between them. Their fights continued to get worse and worse, until eventually it was clear that the relationship had fallen apart. When things ended between Ashley and Marlon, she took primary custody of their son and began to live as a single mother. It was an even more difficult situation than Ashley had been in before, but according to those that knew her, she more than rose to the occasion. She found a place for them to live, took whatever jobs she could find, and began to get back on her feet. For the next few years, Ashley's entire world revolved around her son. However, after a while, Ashley began to feel like something was missing from her life. She was still young and wasn't ready to give up on finding love. She began to put herself back out there and eventually met a man named Marcus. They started seeing each other and eventually moved in together at an apartment just across the state line in Vancouver, Washington. While Ashley's family members were initially happy to hear that she had someone new in her life, they started to notice a change in her. Despite the fact that Ashley and Marcus lived together, she was slow to come forward with details about their relationship. And as time went on, what little they did learn was concerning. Marcus seemed to be possessive of Ashley and controlling over various aspects of her life. He wouldn't let her use their car, and it appeared that he was trying to limit the time that she spent with her family. Of course, Ashley's father and stepmother spoke up about this, but there was little that they could do, as Ashley was an adult. Then, in September of 2013, things took a terrifying turn when Ashley's father, Michael, received a frantic phone call from her. She was screaming and crying on the other end, saying that Marcus had attacked her and that she was now locked in the bathroom and that he wouldn't let her out. Eventually, Michael was able to get on the phone with Marcus, who he threatened with physical violence unless he let Ashley go. He also said that he was contacting the police and rushed over to the Vancouver address as soon as the call was over. While Ashley managed to escape from the encounter out of one of the apartment's windows with her son, it was clear to Michael when he got there that his daughter was being abused. She had a black eye, bruises to her face, and a fat lip. Though she agreed to temporarily leave the apartment, things soon went back to the way that they had been before. Ashley's father and stepmother tried reasoning with her, and at times she seemed like she was ready to make a clean break from the relationship. However, as months passed, nothing ever seemed to materialize. At the same time, Michael and Jody began to worry that there was more to what was going on than what they were getting from Ashley. Little did they know, their intuitions would eventually be proven correct in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Despite all of the recent problems she had been facing, Christmas Day of 2014 seemed to be a welcome bit of normalcy for Ashley Benson and her family. Though her son would be spending the holiday with Marlon and his family, Ashley made the usual trip to her father and stepmother's house on Christmas morning. The family exchanged gifts, and they spent time talking and enjoying each other's company for several hours. During the visit, Ashley gave no indication that anything out of the ordinary was going on. In fact, she seemed to be in good spirits. As the late afternoon approached, Ashley told her parents that she had to go. She had plans that night with some friends and didn't want to be late. She gave few details about where she was going or who she would be with, other than to say that she was seeing a movie. And with that, Ashley stepped out the door. From Michael and Jody's perspective, the rest of the day passed normally. They didn't think they had any reason to worry about Ashley until the following morning, when they received an alarming phone call. It was from Marcus, of all people, who informed them that Ashley was missing. Over the next several hours, Michael, Jody, and other members of the Benson family would make repeated attempts to get in contact with Ashley to no avail. At first, they tried to calm their nerves by telling themselves that the situation wasn't that out of the ordinary. After all, Ashley had a habit of letting her phone die and wasn't all that great at remembering to touch base at the best of times. However, as hours passed with no word from Ashley, these excuses became harder and harder to rationalize. That's when the Bensons got another phone call, one that would not only shatter their world, but would finally explain the uneasy feelings they had about their daughter's life. While the Bensons were becoming more and more anxious about Ashley's whereabouts, meanwhile, several miles across town, staff members at the Doubletree Hotel in Portland's Lloyd district were about to deal with a terrifying crisis of their own. It was an ordinary, albeit busy morning, and they were in the midst of accommodating guests from all over during the holiday season, when out of nowhere, things took a chilling turn. It began at around 11 a.m., when an employee made a horrifying discovery in one of the building's 8th floor stairwells. Just behind the door was a young woman who was lying motionless on the concrete floor. It wasn't long before they were able to determine that she was dead. When detectives arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed that the woman was not dressed for the winter weather. She had no coat with her and wasn't even wearing socks or shoes. In fact, aside from some light clothing, she had very little on her at all. No purse, no cell phone, and no identification of any kind. Given her apparent lack of belongings, investigators speculated that she might have been staying at the hotel, and if so, it meant that these items and others could still be in her room. Based on a lack of any obvious injuries, police almost immediately ruled out any kind of accidental fall down the stairs as being the woman's cause of death. Things only got darker when detectives looked a little closer and discovered what appeared to be marks on her neck. These would later be determined to be consistent with some sort of ligature or manual strangulation. Around the same time, investigators noticed the woman's fingernails. She was wearing fake acrylic nails with flashy-looking designs on them. What caught their attention in particular, though, was that several of the fake nails appeared to be broken. One, on the woman's left index finger, was missing entirely. Based on all of these details, it was obvious to police that they were dealing with a murder, and from the looks of it, the victim had fought with her attacker for her life. When detectives spoke with hotel staff, it wasn't long, though, before their investigation hit an unfortunate roadblock. It turned out that the building was in the middle of having a new surveillance system installed, and the cameras weren't operational yet. It meant that police would have to identify both their victim and killer without the help of any sort of video footage. Worse still, no one at the hotel appeared to remember seeing the victim. As far as they were aware, no one matching her description had either checked in or out. With very little else to go on, authorities began to conduct a room-by-room canvassing of the hotel, knocking on doors and asking guests for any information they might have. This was a sizable and tedious job. As previously mentioned, the place was busy for the holidays, and there were at least 10 stories worth of guest rooms to investigate. They started with the rooms closest to the 8th floor, theorizing that the killer would have likely wanted to move the victim's body as little as possible in order to avoid detection. Luckily, though, while police were in the midst of this massive effort, they received a tip from one of the employees at the front desk. The staff member told them that an unknown woman had repeatedly called the hotel that morning asking about her friend. The woman had said that the friend was in room 715 and had been staying with a man named Chris. Sure enough, when investigators asked hotel staff to look at the guest logs, they learned that room 715 had been booked by a man named Chris Yoon. Immediately, authorities went up to the room, only to find that no one was there. The room itself was fairly clean, aside from a pair of socks and a leftover pizza box. However, as the forensic team was photographing things, one of the detectives made a startling discovery. It was a piece of an acrylic nail, the same type that their unidentified murder victim had been wearing. Investigators were now sure that they were moving in the right direction. During subsequent discussions with hotel staff, detectives learned that Chris Yoon had originally had a reservation for that day, December 26th, but that the previous night he had showed up and asked if he could check in early. He had paid in cash and had checked out before the murder had been discovered. With their suspicions piqued, police began to look into the name Chris Yoon and were able to link him to an apartment complex in Bellevue, Washington. At the same time, they dug into the call logs from room 715 at the DoubleTree and stumbled across yet another lead. One of the numbers that had been called repeatedly from the room was linked to an advertisement on the classifieds website Backpage.com. The particular ad was for escort services from a woman calling herself Foxy Veronica. The photos included in the post were a match to the unidentified murder victim. That being said, she wouldn't stay unidentified for very long. Just a short time later, authorities got another lucky break when their canvassing efforts at the hotel paid off. Wedged behind a vending machine in one of the building's ice machine rooms, they discovered a woman's purse. Inside was a wallet containing photo ID that was a match to the victim. The ID belonged to Ashley Renee Benson. When police delivered the news about Ashley's murder to her family, they were understandably devastated. Not only would they now have to cope with her sudden and terrible loss, But there was the added gut punch that she had been living a secret double life. Of course, the family had been worried about Ashley's relationship with Marcus, but they were caught completely unaware that she had ever been involved in escort work. It left Michael and Jody in particular with countless questions about how and why she had concealed all of this from them, and whether Ashley had been afraid to open up to them for some reason. Given that Ashley's family had no knowledge of her escort work, there was limited information they could provide to police about what had led her to wind up at the DoubleTree Hotel on the night of her murder. However, they were able to provide two names of interest to police: her live-in boyfriend Marcus, and the father of her young son, Marlon. It wasn't hard to understand why the Benson family was suspicious of Marcus. He had been abusive towards Ashley in the past, and they suspected that he was controlling various aspects of her life. Investigators would soon learn that Marcus also had numerous previous run-ins with law enforcement, including charges for assault. As for Marlon, the picture was a little less clear. He and Ashley had definitely had a turbulent relationship, including a recent custody battle over their son. However, it was unclear what kind of a motive Marlon would have had exactly to want Ashley dead. After all, he had been on the winning side of the custody battle several months earlier, with the judge deciding that Marlon and Ashley's son would be better off in his father's care, owing in large part to Ashley's risky choice of lifestyle. Authorities had barely had time to consider this information, though, when they received yet another lead. This one truly unbelievable. It was a call from staff at the DoubleTree Hotel, who informed detectives that Chris Yoon had just checked back in. After racing back to the hotel, police were able to confront the mysterious hotel guest as he was coming out of an elevator. They asked him if his name was Chris Yoon. He replied yes, and was placed under arrest. However, when detectives began to question Chris, it wasn't long before things went sideways. He seemed genuinely stunned that police believed he was involved in a murder, and said that he didn't know anyone by the name of Ashley Benson. Most importantly, though, he said that he hadn't been anywhere near the DoubleTree Hotel until that day, December 26th. As proof, Chris proceeded to produce a number of photos from the day before, showing that he had spent Christmas Day with his family back in Bellevue, Washington. He said that he was a DJ and that he was in Portland for work, and that his fiancée had traveled there with him. They had made the reservation for December 26th a couple of months ago. Despite Chris's confusion about the whole situation, he was completely cooperative with police and offered to give them DNA, fingerprints, or anything else they needed to prove that he wasn't involved. When detectives checked his alibi, a multitude of family members were able to account for his whereabouts on Christmas Day. With all of the information Chris provided checking out, investigators were completely stumped. It was around this same time that they learned things were moving in a similar direction for their other two suspects as well, Marlon and Marcus. Marlon was able to prove that he was out of town visiting family, and while Marcus's timeline was a bit more patchy, it didn't seem like he was near the crime scene at the time of the murder either. That's when someone on the investigative team had a last-ditch idea. Before letting Chris go, they asked him if by any chance he knew anyone else who had a similar name to him. At first, he said no, but then something clicked. Actually, there was another guy who police might want to check out. His name was Tae-bum Yoon, but he also went by the name Chris. The only difference was that this other Chris Yoon spelled his last name with a double O rather than an OU. Also, he just so happened to live at the same apartment complex in Bellevue, Washington. With this incredible new piece of the puzzle now in hand, police began to turn their attention to the second Chris Yoon. And as they did, more and more pieces of incriminating information began to emerge. For starters, when police rechecked the hotel reservation for room 715, they discovered that when Yoon had checked in early, he had provided incorrect personal information for the Chris that he was trying to impersonate. He had also had to change the reservation to the double O spelling of his last name to match the driver's license he provided, telling hotel staff that it was a typo. While sources appear to disagree on the exact date, on either December 27th or 28th, authorities were able to find their most definitive link to Yoon yet when they recovered Ashley's cell phone. They had found the device after obtaining a warrant and discovering that it had pinged a cell phone tower near the DoubleTree. Police combed the area, ultimately finding the cell phone in a trash can about a block and a half away from the hotel. On the phone, authorities discovered a wealth of communications between Ashley and Yoon. They'd exchanged calls, text messages, and emails from accounts linked to Ashley's Backpage escort ads. The messages between the pair showed that Yoon had been a regular client of Ashley's for several months, and that he had called and sent her more than 24 texts on Christmas Day alone. However, they also revealed something potentially more sinister. In the lead-up to Ashley's death, tensions had been rising between them. Part of this seemed to be about money, but it was also deeper than that. Yoon was obsessed with Ashley, and it seemed had been pressuring her to leave her escort life behind and be with him instead. Every time Yoon saw Ashley, he had been giving her thousands of dollars, taking her out to expensive dinners, and buying her gifts. In exchange, he told her that he didn't want other men in her life. An email sent from Yoon's account shortly before the murder read in part, quote, "Let me make this clear before you read my message. You will be compensated for all the time you invested in me. I have every intention of paying you. Before you blame me 100%, I want you to know that you did break our agreement." The email went on to suggest that Ashley had agreed to stop posting on Backpage, but that Yoon had recently uncovered new listings that she had put up. With all of this information, investigators were fairly certain that they had uncovered not only the person responsible for Ashley's murder, but also his motive. They theorized that on the night of the killing, Chris Yoon had demanded Ashley leave the escort business for good, and that she had declined, telling him that she no longer wanted to see him anymore. In a rage, he had strangled her and left her body in the hotel stairwell. All of it seemed to add up, but there was still one problem. No one had any idea where Chris Yoon was. In order to track Yoon down, police first visited his apartment in Bellevue, Washington. However, he wasn't there, and they soon learned that he had only rented the place for about a month. They also traveled to Yoon's parents' house, where they discovered that they had no idea where he was either. In fact, they seemed to believe that he was attending college. Finally, a few days later, authorities obtained a warrant to ping Yoon's cell phone. It led them to another Portland hotel not far from the DoubleTree. The cat and mouse game took yet another disturbing turn when police arrived at this second hotel and asked staff about their suspect. They confirmed that Yoon had been staying there, though said that he had since left. When they checked through the call logs of Yoon's room, they learned that he had been calling other numbers associated with Backpage escort ads. Investigators were now worried that if they didn't act fast, they might have a second murder on their hands. After digging through more information they had on Yoon, detectives were able to learn that he was a frequent traveler on Amtrak trains, which he used to move back and forth between Washington and Oregon. It turned out to be one of the final missing details that would allow them to capture him once and for all. Approximately 2 weeks after Ashley's murder, on January 7th, 2015, investigators uncovered two crucial pieces of information. First, Yoon was staying at another hotel in the Portland area, and second, he had booked a train ticket to head back to Washington that day. Authorities split up into two groups, with some going to the hotel and others heading to Portland's Union Station. When detectives arrived at the hotel where Yoon was staying, they just missed him as he came out the door and got into a cab. However, authorities were able to contact the driver and covertly get him to reveal where he was going. They followed in disbelief as Yoon traveled back to the scene of the crime, where he walked the halls of the DoubleTree Hotel for a short time in what investigators later theorized was a possible attempt to remove some of the items such as Ashley's purse that he had hidden there. After doing this, Yoon hopped back into the cab where he made the rest of his journey to Union Station. As Yoon exited the vehicle and headed towards the station's doors, he was swarmed by police. The first words out of his mouth were, "How did you find me?" Once Yoon was in custody, he was interviewed by detectives. Though he denied killing Ashley, he confirmed several of the details investigators had uncovered so far, including that he had been seeing Ashley for several months and that he had met her through her escort work. He also admitted that he wanted Ashley to be his girlfriend, though claimed that he wasn't obsessed. Instead, he pinned the blame for everything that had happened on another person police were now familiar with: Marcus. According to Yoon, Marcus wasn't really Ashley's boyfriend at all. He not only knew about her escort work, he was the one who was really in control and had emotionally and physically intimidated her into doing it. While this might simply seem like a last-ditch effort on Yoon's part to escape responsibility, and in many ways it almost certainly was, in fact, by this point, he was not the first person to make this claim to police. The few friends of Ashley's who did know about her escort work had been wary of Marcus, and once her family found out about it and combined it with the abusive relationship that they already knew they had, they were convinced that Ashley had been a victim of human trafficking. In short, they accused him of being what's known as a lover boy or a Romeo pimp, a trafficker who operates by trying to make young, vulnerable people fall in love with them in order to exploit them. While cases like this are extremely difficult to prove, it's worth pointing out that Ashley herself had admitted in the court hearings over custody of her son several months prior to her death that the money she made from her work often went to covering her and Marcus's entire rent, bills, and car insurance. Remember, this would have been a car that, according to Ashley's family, she was forbidden by Marcus from driving. When police interviewed Marcus throughout the investigation, he was reportedly cagey about anything to do with Ashley's escort work. At first, he claimed to know nothing about it, but as more information was uncovered, he continued to change his story, right up to the point where he reportedly not only admitted that he knew who Chris Yoon was, but that he had been the one who had dropped off Ashley at the DoubleTree Hotel on the night of her murder. This had been why there were some gaps in Marcus's initial alibi. Despite all of this, there was no evidence that Marcus was involved in Ashley's actual murder. That wasn't the case for Chris Yoon, however, with detectives not believing that he was simply a good guy who was trying to get Ashley Benson out of a bad life. As police interviewed Yoon more, it became clear to them that after spending thousands of dollars on Ashley, he felt that he was owed something. He believed that she belonged to him. They theorized that when he arrived at the DoubleTree Hotel that night, even if he hadn't been specifically planning to kill Ashley, he knew that it was a possibility. That's why he had hacked the email account of the other Chris Yoon, in order to steal his reservation at the hotel and possibly frame him for the crime. Following Yoon's arrest, police also allegedly found pictures on his phone and items at his apartment that suggested he was heavily involved in cocaine trafficking. According to a report from the news outlet The Oregonian at the time, quote, "The photos included bags of cocaine, shipping containers addressed to people in multiple states, and one photo of a computer screen showing an order for White Stallion's Flame Cocaine, all rock." Bellevue police conducted a search of Yoon's apartment and found further drug evidence, according to court records. In a hallway laundry closet, police found a quart-sized plastic bag containing cocaine, digital scales, and a small black safe with cocaine residue, according to a search warrant affidavit. In a master bedroom, police found a cutting agent for cocaine and postal service shipping receipts and labels throughout the unit. This seemed to explain how Yoon had access to the thousands of dollars he was routinely giving to Ashley, despite having no known job and his parents believing that he was a student. While Yoon initially proclaimed his innocence and said that he was going to fight the charges against him, he eventually changed his tune and agreed to accept a plea deal from prosecutors. In 2017, he pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. It appears that no charges were ever pursued against him over the drugs. However, it's unclear why exactly this was the case. In terms of the accusations of human trafficking against Marcus, as far as we can tell, this was never proven in court, and we couldn't find any charges that had been laid to that effect either. The only exception appears to be a lawsuit filed by the Benson family against both the owners of the DoubleTree Hotel and Backpage.com, which alleged that both businesses had failed to use established practices to prevent trafficking of the type that they claimed had happened to Ashley. Unfortunately, aside from a few articles back in 2015 that mentioned the lawsuit was moving forward, we could not find any further updates. It's worth pointing out that Backpage was seized and taken down by the U.S. Department of Justice in 2018, in large part due to accusations that it was promoting and facilitating human trafficking. At the time of this recording, the legal proceedings surrounding that case are still ongoing. In Ashley's case specifically, it appears that whatever was happening to her may have been going on for years. Multiple sources we came across state that as far back as 2011, she was involved with another man named Latrell Poston, who was later convicted of human trafficking-related offenses. Just like Marcus, Poston claimed to be Ashley's boyfriend, and news outlets state that she continued to provide him with the proceeds from her escort work for a period of time even after he was behind bars. In closing, this is definitely one of those stories that left us with a sick feeling in the pits of our stomachs for a number of reasons. But perhaps chief among these is the idea that you can never really know what is going on in someone's life. Based on everything we came across in our research, we have every reason to believe that Ashley Benson came from an extremely loving and supportive family who cared deeply about her and wanted the absolute best for her. And yet, she was still sucked into a world of unfathomable darkness, one that ultimately led to her untimely death. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.